This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is part 2 with Brian Hoyland. Hello, Brian.
Hi.
It is so wonderful hearing your story. And for those of you that want to start at the beginning, I will have the link in the description to part 1, but you can also stay right here because there's a lot more that we're going to be talking about. Brian, we were just talking about living life like a prayer, and you're still telling us about your near-death experience. So why don't you jump back in where you left off?
Okay. I'll wrap it up quick so we can get to some questions because I think that really brings out more of the story. But so suffering joyfully was the next thing that I was told I needed to do. And the prayer really goes into that because, being properly aligned with God, that's what suffering joyfully is. It's accepting his will over my own will. I explained how accepting my wife's will over mine, that need to have something fulfilled, but not completely solved by me, that's independent to her. And so when I realized that, I'm going to have to go back to this body that's not in good condition. I mean, this body had just died. It was meant to be dead. It was not supposed to be alive. And I sent you some pictures so you can put those up. But my heart was completely destroyed. And that's what led me to die. And I lived for another 2 years after that with that heart. So that to me is just amazing. But that's because God was holding it in his hand. But along with that, there was a lot of suffering physically that had to come. And so I knew that this wasn't over. Making this choice to come back, I was accepting that I was going to have more suffering. And I've learned through this process that suffering joyfully is just aligning ourselves with God's will. That acceptance doesn't mean that we like it. We don't have to like the suffering, but to accept that this is what's best. This is what is happening right now. And if I could stop it, we all probably have seen that movie Groundhog Day where he, has to relive his life over and over again. And he steps in that puddle a bunch of times and it's like, knucklehead, avoid the puddle. Eventually he does, right? We can relieve some of that suffering in our lives by just using our experience. But when things can't be changed, and there's a lot of different types of suffering in life, and we can't always change those things, but we have to be able to accept that for right now, I'm going to have to endure this. And once we get to that acceptance, we find a resiliency. It's completely contrary to the idea of holding on to that suffering and being angry and embittered about it, which only compounds the suffering and makes it far more extreme and devastating to where we're actually hurting ourselves more by the way that we mentally approach it. And so accepting it, carrying our cross, as he says for us to do in the Bible, to pick up our cross daily and follow him. And he didn't shy away from suffering. I mean, his whole life was a life of suffering. And yet he gives us strength when we accept it. Because when we're resisting, what can he do with that? He can't force it on us. He gave us free will. But it's that acceptance. Now all of a sudden we can tap into that strength that he has, and his strength can work through us. And that's what I have found through suffering joyfully, is that I just accept my suffering and I ask him to assist me, and he does. He never has failed me. And I think my life is living proof of it, having, gone for so long with this terrible heart. And I mean, I was in and out of the hospital so many times that I can't keep track of how many times. But the other thing was to share his love. We certainly can't share his love if we're angry and resentful all the time, carrying a chip around on our shoulder. Nobody likes that person. When that person walks into a room, we all can feel it. We don't even have to talk to the person yet. That negative energy is palpable. We're like, oh man, something's wrong with that person, and there's just this anger about them. And that isn't going to help us to share God's love. If we're going through life being angry, we're not being like him. We're not exuding his love. And that's what sharing his love is to let his grace, let his love work through us so that when people see us, they see a light that's coming from us that doesn't make sense for a human being. It doesn't make sense for for Brian Hoyland to have this love, because we've known him a long time ago and he didn't have this experience. So something's different here. It's that love of God working through me, and that's what I get to share. And I have to realize, at this point I realized when he was telling me, is that I can't be the one who's trying to give it, because it always goes back to my attachments, to the things that I want out of it. And it's hard for me. I don't know how other people are, but I assume it's the same way. It's hard for us not to corrupt that. And so after he told me these things, he said, now it's time for me to go back. And that was it. All was done, and I had to go back. So I'm trying to go back. And this was the only time in heaven that I felt pain. I felt like my legs were stuck in concrete that was, hardening fast, that it just was so hard to move. And every effort that I made to move was a little bit more painful. So every step I was getting away from him and his presence, there was like part of my soul was aching to go back, but I didn't have that option. So I had to keep going. And I went down that same dark tunnel that I had came through. And I'm now looking at that place that was the dark void, but yet now it's my hospital room. And I can see my body laying there. I can see all the doctors and nurses and every other medical person that was in that room. I can see what they're doing now. As I'm approaching, I'm getting closer and closer. I'm seeing all these things, and I'm still feeling this love, though. The love wasn't cut off. The love was so strong still. And as soon as I got back to my body, I snapped back into place. I didn't have to have anyone explain it to me. It just was instinctual, and I just walked into my body. But it kind of felt like that portal, or that tunnel closed off, but it didn't. What it was the distractions and the cares of the world immediately started oppressing me. I could feel immediately the pain again. I could hear the noises. I could, just anxiety was trying to creep in, fear, sadness, all these emotions that we experience as a part of human life were all present. Were all around me, but that love stayed with me. And it was as if it was like a barrier or a suit of armor that protected me from these things. But I could feel how they were like trying to like sneak back in. And I didn't want anything to do with them, so I didn't entertain those. But it was interesting to me to see how, that often in psychology we call it a positive mindset, to stay on track towards our goals and keep these other things outside of us and put them in the proper perspective. That's all well and good, but it's something that we truly have to do, because if we start to entertain the anxieties, we just turn it around into this terrible monster that really isn't as big a deal as it is. And we're suffering prior to ever having it execute anything. But as I snapped into my body, it was so amazing, because the doctors in my medical charts, they put it down as he spontaneously revived. Now, I was dead for over 10 minutes. So that's a long time to be dead. And I was in the hospital, mind you. So it wasn't like I was on my couch. This is in the hospital, in the ICU. So I'm hooked up to tubes and all kinds of stuff, But they were monitoring me with the most sophisticated medical equipment possible. And so I wanted to, for whatever reason, I didn't know all that stuff. I just knew that when I was coming back, they had this Lucas machine on me. I don't know how many people know what that is, but it's a automatic CPR machine. So it does chest compressions on you. And of course they had me hooked up to tubes so that I was getting oxygen in. But they took that off at some point as I was coming down the tunnel. So I'm pretty sure they thought I was dead, and they were about to call this thing off. And yet here I come snapping into my body, because this is the greatest part of it. Is as soon as I could, I tried to like pop up as much as I could, because I wanted to talk to this doctor who was, right over my face. But I couldn't. I was strapped down because they had been shocking me and doing a lot of stuff, procedures to me before I had died. So I don't know how much they shocked me when I was dead. I didn't see that part, but I was strapped down, so I could only get up a little bit. And I asked him, did I just die? Because I didn't want to, I had never believed in near-death experiences. Being a psychotherapist, I always thought, a lot of different theories are out there. None of them make any sense now to me, but at the time, I tried to buy into those because, I just had never experienced that myself. And, often that's how human beings are. We're fairly narcissistic, and we have to see and, experience things ourselves before we believe it. But he couldn't quite hear me, so he had to come closer. But this look on his face was like, like he's looking at this guy who just is dead and shouldn't be here. And so he leans closer, and I say it again, as best I could. I had tubes in my throat, and so he's listened to me. He goes, "Yeah, you just died." And so then he, tries to calm me and has me lay down. I'm like, "I'm fine. I'm totally calm," But I couldn't really express that to him. But there was the nurse, the head nurse, and the other nurses who were there. They came back and told me how I was glowing, and people from all over the hospital, all these other nurses, because nurses talk quite a bit. So all these nurses kept coming in my room the whole week I was in the ICU to just to see me. They're like, we heard this experience, and or they didn't know about my whole experience until I told them, but they knew I had just died and came back, and I had this light, like this just beautiful light, and they wanted to see it. They couldn't believe that, that it was something that nurses who maybe, I don't know their personal backgrounds, but they were very excited about how I looked. And so, that was true, but I could feel it. I could feel this enthusiasm or euphoria that I had. I felt so peaceful and so much love still with me that nothing could touch me. And I ended up having to go and get that, I had that defibrillator in, but the doctor wanted to now put in a pacemaker defibrillator. So one that did both at, in the same machine. And so they were still so worried that I would die from my heart condition because, I was definitely not, my heart was not working like it should. So they couldn't give me proper anesthesia to put this thing in. And, they have to cut your skin open and put the machine in, but they also have to put the wires down into your heart. So it's a pretty invasive procedure. And so they did it, but I honestly don't even remember any pain for that. I remember a little pinch here and there, but it was nothing like I would have expected it to be. And, the doctor was trying to talk to me about sports and all kinds of other things, just trying to take my mind off of it. And I kept thinking, you don't have to bother talking to me, doc. I'm fine. I'd rather just think about my experience, but I didn't want to be rude to him, because he was such a kind doctor. And so I was just really trying to, just be kind and loving to him and as he was doing for me. But I just was so blessed that nothing could touch me. And I knew that that's how I had to live my life, in that connection with God, that even with the distractions of the world, all these distractions that come about, the fear, anxiety, all that stuff, that even with those, we can experience that love of God if we just get out of his way and let him. And that's what I had to learn to do. And so I just have tried to live my life now of letting God live through me. And that benefit that I get out of that is I get to have his love in me more, as opposed to just shutting him out.
Well, thank you, Brian. Your story is amazing and it's beautiful. You are serving people in so many ways by sharing your story. I want to go over a few things because so many people hear these near-death experiences and they want to hear more of the visuals. And I know you said that there were beings and you saw the light. You also saw this, like you were calling this mixture of colors of green and pink. Were there other things that you saw around you when you were there?
Yeah, there was a lot of things that I saw, but remember how I said that I could see in all the directions and I could see
Yes.
all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It was the things that I focused on are what I was able to bring back in my memory. And honestly, the thing that I couldn't take my eyes off of was Jesus. I just could not take my eyes. I've heard other people talking about it, and people always ask me these questions. Well, like, did you see, grandma there? Did you see your great grandma there who died that you had prayed that prayer for? These questions are important. But when I was there, I got to experience everybody who was connected with Jesus. But not that they didn't matter. It was that he was so much more important because without him, none of that stuff would be there. And to know that so concretely, it made that experience with him so much more fulfilling, that everything went through him. And that's where all that love was coming from. So all this love, in our memories of love with other people, all was with him. I think once you're there as a permanent resident, I think you get to experience in the more fullness than I did, because coming back, I don't know that my mind could handle everything that I experienced. Just think about the fact that it seemed like much longer than 10 minutes to me. I mean, for how many days or months or years that it seemed like I was there, to be compact into 10 minutes, I don't know that my mind could handle that without exploding, let alone all the other extravagancies. So it's really bizarre to try to explain it, but most of the things that I saw relate to Jesus. It was that instinctually I was beeline towards Jesus, because that's where all of my essence was coming from. That's where my need to be, my security, my home was there. It's like when you go to a hotel or a friend's house, or even I go to my parents' house. I don't feel like I'm at home. It's better than anywhere else, but it's still not my home, my own bed. That comfort that we get in a familiar setting like our own home is something that we all can relate to. But that's where I felt like I was most at home. Like there was nothing there that I was worried about. I mean, all my horrible things were already exposed, and I could see that he still loved me. How often do we get that in life?
You said that he loves even those that reject him.
Yeah.
And there are some people that aren't even necessarily rejecting him, but they have a different faith.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that all play out in heaven? Did you get any kind of a sense of that?
I only got it from my own perspective, so I can't really say. I have my own personal beliefs, but and I think with my experience, my personal beliefs are even more validated. But what I can say from my experience is that there were things that I was judged on, that I did wrong, that I was just ignorant of, that I really didn't think that they were wrong. And when I was there, I accepted that they were wrong. I didn't have any attachment to it. I let go of all that, and I didn't try to argue with Jesus, say, well, no, what about this reason and that reason? Because we always have justifications for why we do things. Otherwise, we wouldn't do them. But I could tell that ignorance, he recognized it, and he didn't hold that against me to the same degree that he did for the things I consciously went into. So that is probably that's how I assume that he's going to look at it. I also think when I was looking at that dark void, that there was a span of time, however time works there. I can't really say, but but when I was looking at that dark void, it seemed like, and I can only say that this seems like, because I didn't experience it that way because I had a faith in Jesus already, but it sure seemed like that me saying I didn't want to even have this without Jesus, that profession of faith, because it was more than just saying those words. It was like a real profession of faith that I didn't want that. But I don't know that somebody who's ignorant and doesn't know Jesus, sitting in that dark void like I was, that maybe he does something different to show, hey, here I am. And if their ignorance is lifted and they say, yes, I accept, I had no clue, maybe they get to go in. I don't know. Maybe they reject him and they say, I don't care, I believe in this or that. But that would be the denying of the truth. And maybe they go the other way. I don't know. But I do know that from my experience that he did look at the ignorance. And yeah, so.
That's really interesting. Something else that I found fascinating is that you could see everything. And I even heard you once say that you could even see, like, if there was something in the way, you could still see past it.
Yes, that was incredible. I was so blown away by, think about all those beings that were there, and I mean, millions upon millions of beings. When you're sitting there looking at them, it'd be hard to even comprehend that that's many, because at some point you don't see the ones that are further behind. I could see them all. And not only could I see all of them, but I could see them completely. So the front of them, the back of them, all at the same time. So there was nothing hidden from me. this is, it's so hard to put into words in, our human understanding, which can't comprehend something like that. But our vocabulary is so limited too. But just imagine that you're looking at the front and the back of me right now. That's hard to imagine, right?
Right.
Imagine doing that with millions and millions of beings. It's unbelievable. Plus, you still have all those memories of seeing the light and going in all the different directions. I mean, it was like how you can imagine a computer operates, and it can pull out all this information that's whatever's stored in that computer can be pulled out. Well, imagine everything that's ever happened being available to you at the same time, but it's not confusing. It's not distracting. A computer, it even takes time. Sometimes it takes a little longer than I like it to take to pull out some of the information. But there, I could pull out anything I wanted at any time, and it wasn't confusing. It wasn't like it was just like, oh no, there's just so much. You ask me what my favorite song is, I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so many things to choose from. I can't do it quickly. There, it's easy. All that stuff, and it's not confusing. It doesn't overwhelm us.
And who were the beings that were there?
I'm assuming, I didn't ask this because it didn't seem important to me, but they were loving. They were beings that were connected with Jesus. So I could feel that they loved me, and they had my best interest and wanted what was best for me. So I imagine being going through all of your sins in front of a group of people. That'd be pretty daunting for, I think, just about anybody. It wasn't that way there. I did not feel like the same kind of judgment that we do here. It was that they wanted me to understand it, that they wanted me to get rid of my attachment to it. And everything that I was going through when I was there, it was like I was being healed. Like all those rough places, the attachments we have in life can often dictate our choices, and not to the best choice always. We sometimes will hold on to something that really has less value than a relationship, but we'll say, oh, I gotta take care of my car. I gotta go do this. And we'll sacrifice time with somebody who's far more important than that car. And we look back a few years later and say, I wish I wouldn't have paid so much attention to that car, or some other material object or personality trait or who knows what it is. But so all those things are being shaved off of me. And these people that were there were absolutely wanting that to happen as quickly as possible for me. And and as completely as possible. Their love was very extreme. So I think that it was, I don't know if it was people in purgatory, if it was people in heaven. I don't know exactly where I was. I know that this wasn't all of heaven that I was seeing. It was kind of like an entry point. I don't really know how to describe it, but I knew for sure that there was far more to heaven than what I was experiencing. That there was far more to come. It's kind of like with that straw effect that I was trying to explain, is that newness and that freshness was, I was just getting a sip of it. I was just getting the beginning stages. There was far more to come.
I've heard people describe it as they were in the lobby of heaven.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just walk in the front door and you're in the lobby.
The other thing I find interesting, because others have said this too, is how much attention was on you. Jesus was there, all of these beings, and they were all focused on you. And to me, that speaks to how important we are.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, Jesus died for me. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we all know that he died for all of us, but that's not, that doesn't give as much justice to the fact that he died personally for me. And it really blows your mind when you think about that somebody would love you. I mean, I know I will. I guess I can say I know. Until that time comes, I don't know that I would actually go through with it, but I'm pretty sure I would die for my kids. You know, I I feel very strongly that I would do that. But for somebody else's kids, well, maybe kids are innocent, so that's an easy example. Somebody who's not very pleasant, I don't know that I could do that. Somebody who I really dislike is even further down the spectrum. It's somebody that I, have very strong feelings of dislike for. I can't say that I would be willing to die for them. I think that's changed in my life now, but I know that's how he felt. Because when I was looking at him and I was going through the sins that I did, he was loving me and showing me how I hurt him during that passion of his, that he still was willing to die for me despite what I had done to him. I, it just blows your mind away to think about that.
And the other thing that blows my mind, well, so many things do, but when you talk about time, I have such a hard time understanding no time.
Yeah.
Is that something that you can explain a little bit more, or maybe it's just impossible to explain?
Well, I'll start off with just acknowledging it is impossible. There's really no way. I even when I think about it now, I can think about it, but I can't explain what I'm thinking about. But there, to me, it seems like there certainly had to be some kind of time there, because I definitely knew past. I knew the past. I knew my life prior to death, and I knew I had just died. So those are two distinct parts of time, at least, although when you're there, the time aspect is gone. So the memories are all still so real that it seems as if they're happening anyway, like right now. So that's where time gets kind of conflated, is that it's not really gone and it's not really present. It's there. But even in my experience, I had all this other stuff for that 10 human minutes of time that I was in heaven. There was a lot that happened in that period. So still something was still going on. So eternity must have some kind of an aspect of time, just not the way that we understand it here, because we're in this time of, we're born and then we die, and it lasts maybe 100 years if we're lucky. And so but I really got the impression though that how little of not value, but of significance our lives really are when you take the amount of time that we live. I mean, you go back all the way to the beginning of time, we're like this tiny little speck on the whole spectrum. And yet for us, we think that's super important because we're the ones who are living it. Our lives are more important than any other life because we have to be the one directing it. But when you look at it, 100 years after I'm gone, nobody's going to think about me. Nobody's going to remember me. And so it's really an odd thing to think about, how when we're there, we are that significant, that everything about us is not forgotten. It's always remembered and it's always cherished. God loves us. It still blows me away.
Well, and it shows too that we have such short lives compared to eternity, and how important it is to try to do our best in this life. And I loved how you were saying that prayer is also serving other people.
Yeah, you're so right. I love how you put that. Is that it's really important for us to live the maximum of our lives that we are given. You know, some people do amazing things with a very short period of time, and some people do almost nothing with a really long period of time. I don't know why that happens. Everybody's got a different trajectory, and God's working so many different things in each life that when you put them all together, you can see the beautiful plan that He has. But we really mess a lot of things up, and often it's because we don't do for somebody else what we should do. We don't extend that love and that and acceptance. I hate to say acceptance, because then it's almost as if we're accepting the bad things. We should never accept the bad things somebody does. That's all that does is put more negativity into the world. But we should accept the person. We should always love the person. We shouldn't ever get to the point where we say, you know what, that person's too far gone and I want nothing to do with them. That's such a personal judgment, and it doesn't account for God's intervention. At any point in any of our lives, God could finally get through to us. He's always trying. I can look back on my life and see all kinds of times that He was trying to direct me in one choice, and I chose to go the other way because it seemed more satisfying to me at the time to go with that one. And then a lot of negative things happen because now I'm trying to direct my own life. But the ones that I have chosen to let His grace work, to let that inspiration that I have felt from Him, is turned out beautifully, and I've got so many treasures in my life from the times that I have actually listened to Him. And what blows me away is how many times he's turned really bad things around to good when I've tried to get back with him. It's like he's never giving up. And that's what we have to think about other people, is that we don't know that they're going down this bad path. We can see that. We can see the externals. That's something we can judge. Yeah, that's not right. Don't murder somebody. It's not hard to figure that one out. But that doesn't mean that person's just a throwaway, because if they somehow get out of their own selfishness and stop thinking that it's okay to take somebody else's life because it matters to them to take it away, and they say, I'm going to let God influence my life, who knows what they could do? They might be the best person in the world because they were so extreme to the other side that now they realize, hey, this is not the right thing to do. I'm going to go and follow God and do charitable things for other people and only care about their good. They may sacrifice everything of themselves just for the downtrodden, And so I look at it as I really have to be careful not to put my own personal judgments into it, and just pray for people. Just show them love. Just even sometimes, rejecting the idea of going along with somebody who's doing something wrong and saying, hey, you know what? I can't be taking that. I don't agree with it. And just standing my ground, and not saying I don't care about you, but I don't care about that choice. I'm not going to do it. Often we know from our own experience, sometimes when people challenge us that way, we're like, maybe I really shouldn't. I was thinking that this was wrong, but something else told me that, oh, just do it. It feels good. Go ahead, go with it. And now they might actually make the right choice because we stood up for them, and in a way that wasn't judgmental, but it was supporting for the good. And, so there's a lot of ways we can do it, but it's always coming down to just trying to say, how would I like to be treated? If I was making this bad decision, what would be the thing that would help me? And, sometimes if we know a person, it makes it a little easier because we can say, well, this person doesn't really react well to me giving them a psychotherapist type of a perspective on it. They'll say, quit counseling me, So maybe if I just, give them a hug, or, could be something simple like that. Or it could be something more extreme, like saying, no, I can't go with you today. What you're doing, what you're going to do down that path is something that I'm not willing to partake in. So either way is love.
I think that's really good advice, and everything you've said is just really fascinating, and I so appreciate you being here. You are very humble about your book, but you do have a book. Can you tell us a bit about that, and then also if there's a website or any other way that people can reach out to you?
Yeah, I wrote a book. The amazing thing about this book is I had a heart transplant 2 years after this experience, and during that time I was so sick. I was in and out of the hospital, so I didn't really get much of a chance to share my story. And when I got the heart transplant, I finally started to feel better. So in 3 months, I wrote this book. And of course, not having told the story, I'm not as pleased with the book as I am with how I'm able to relate the story now, because having been asked questions and having told it, I've found better ways of explaining certain things that are really complex to explain. But the book is just my heartfelt description of what I experience. I don't try to interpret things in the book, so you just kind of getting what I felt like I had experienced, and it's I don't know that it's totally basic because it does have all the things that happen, but it's just from the heart. So it doesn't. There's not any of my interpretation because I really didn't have a lot of time to think about, well, how do I explain time? How do I explain, my vision? I just tried to explain it. So some of that is improved, and yet some people actually really like the book because of that just pureness of so soon after my experience to just getting it down. And the reason I wrote it is because I didn't, after you get a heart transplant, the doctors don't give you a clean bill of health and say, hey, we'll see you in 70 years when you actually die the next time. It's like, you may not make it a year. It's touch or go, and you're in and out of the doctors for a long time. So I thought, I really don't want this story to die with me. If I die, then it's gone. So I got to get this down. And some people need to read things. They like to read. And other people, that's why I tell, go on interviews, is because some people don't like to read. And I just want people to hear this story. If they buy the book, that's great. What I do is I donate the money and I get another book and I give it to somebody else who can't afford it.
Oh, that's nice.
But yeah, because this wasn't something I created. This is something that was given to me. So I don't want to just make something off of it. I want to give, like he told me to do, share his love. And that's why I do interviews. I'm not a real big fan of interviews. You're putting a lot of personal things out there, and yet I want to share that love so badly that I'm willing to do interviews because I want people to hear this story, and that's really why that book was written. Is just I just wanted to share his love, and in every avenue and every way that I can do it.
I am so glad that you're willing to share it and also willing to come on shows like mine because, like you said, people want to get that information in various ways. I love reading books and I also love listening to podcasts where people share their near-death experiences. So I do really appreciate that. And I'll put links in the description for anybody who wants those. And I just thank you so much, Brian, for being here. Are there any parting words that you want to leave with the people that are listening?
Just to be open to God's inspirations in your life. We've got an enemy who likes to get us to do things, and we've got God who wants us to do things his way. And he's far more gentle, but basically what I would say is just get out of his way, let him love you. Once you let him love you, your love will maximize and you will start to love the world and you will treat people so much better and your life will be improved. I just don't see a downside to it. I do see a downside to holding on to our worldly aspirations and, our ideas of what we want out of life, because we all know that we can't hold on to everything forever. So you win the trophy today, but tomorrow somebody else is going after it. And with God, it's different. We're working towards an attainable, eternal glory with him. It's beautiful, and I hope everyone goes that way.
And Brian, you are a beautiful reflection of what you just shared. And I thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful to hear your story, and I appreciate the time you gave us.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure to be here.
I really enjoyed my conversation with Brian. I hope you did as well. He has a perspective. It's different than some of my other guests, but I love learning from each and every one of them, and I hope you do too. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the variety of things that we talked about. So go ahead and put that in the comments. And then also, if you've made it this far, go ahead and put made it. I always appreciate that. And I appreciate your likes as well. Thank you, everybody. Most of all, I just appreciate all of you who are here watching my channel. It is really great to have you. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. Please add comments and questions you'd like future guests to answer. Also, if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. That'll help keep this podcast going. You can also go to Beyond with Heather Tesch to look for more episodes.